Hi everyone. So this one's going to be a little different. I suppose like many of my at-home videos are. So today I wanted to talk a bit about music. Some, very few of you perhaps, might have seen my queer media episodes where I talk a little bit about some former media that touched me. And I know that they're quite queer coded, so I can understand how that might not be for everyone. And also those videos are a little bit rough and ready. So I've always wanted to come back to these, to this topic, because I love film, music, books, that sort of thing. And it would be remiss of me to not talk about this a little bit more in my channel. And also music has formed a lot of my backstory, or my lore, so to speak. So I think it's nice to kind of combine these things into one video. So before I go into a few songs that I would say has been part of my trans journey, a quick potted history about what music means to me. Now I talk about my dad on this channel a little bit, and he was the one that provided my music education. We would bond over vinyl records. Pink Floyd, Kraftwerk, and 70s Prague was the most memorable and notable. I have very fond memories of the two of us sitting in our study as I was presented with sounds and music the likes of which I had never heard before. The music combined with the trippy art cover of the albums took me off to fantastical worlds where anything was possible and all things were on the table. And as a family, we would take long road trips to our holiday destinations, and the music was central to the entertainment. Operettas and Peter and the Wolf provided a spectrum of emotion and narrative told through music. And so through this, the seed of music was planted, and it's always been there. This kind of like nostalgic connection to my past, to my family, and it's often been an outlet for my own emotional needs as well. Since childhood, I've discovered and enjoyed rock, grunge, Britpop, alternative, hip-hop, trip-hop, electronica, rap, classical, country, folk, pop, disco, and everything in between. My music taste is pretty eclectic, and a lot of the things that I especially enjoy are quite obscure. Some of the songs that I'm going to be talking about today, maybe many of you haven't actually heard before, so perhaps this is going to be a nice way for you to discover some new music. In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 tracks, none of which, as far as I know, are overtly queer or trans, but in my own personal headcanon, they represent something central to my journey. So this means I can't touch on my love of Queen as I grew up, or K-Tempest today. In fact, most pop is off the table. I'm going to avoid the more obvious tracks as well, such as Glory Box by Portishead. I Just Wanna Be a Woman? How on the nose can you get? I know my interpretations are certainly my own, and they are by no means a typical way of reading these songs. But this is all about my own headcanon, so feel free to disagree with me in the comment section below, or talk about your own headcanon songs. But you won't be changing my mind. Sorry. The first track I'm going to go into is No Surprises by Radiohead. Radiohead are by far my first musical love. While I appreciated and enjoyed music before then, the first time I heard some of the tracks off the album The Bends, I was in love. The music and lyrics spoke to teenage me more than anything had ever done up to that point, and that includes books and films and so many other sources of media. Street Spirit was basically on repeat for years, until OK Computer came along. No Surprises is a song which seems to have a few different interpretations. You can find people describing it as a song about suicidal ideation, to a critique of modern life, liberals, or politics. But I've always seen it as a yearning for a life of normalcy, leading to a peaceful and calm end, a handshake of carbon monoxide. An existence which is mundane and dull, where you have the trappings of a regular life, such a pretty house and such a pretty garden, but this mundanity is something almost sought after. This song is usually described as depressing, but I've always found a hopeful, bittersweet quality underpinning it. I think growing up as I did, with the album being released during an incredibly difficult part of my life, a typical standard life seemed like a dream. In a way it still does. My ultimate transition goal, as I've said before in other videos, is a life of mundanity and normalcy. I do want the pretty house. I really want the pretty garden. I do long for a life of no alarms and no surprises. It feels like a fantasy at this point, but I still put on this track almost 30 years after it came out and allow myself to dream a little. The next track is also pretty old, 61 years old in fact. Many of you might not think you know this track, but anyone who's a Black Mirror fan would definitely have heard it because it features in several episodes, notably on 1 Million Credits. It's called Anyone Who Knows What Love Is by Irma Thomas. Of course, I first came across it through episodes of Black Mirror, but it's found its way onto my most played tracks on Spotify recently. Now, probably the most common interpretation of this song is about a woman staying with a man despite his bad behaviour, which is no doubt how most people would see it, and it's an absolutely valid way of reading this song. However, for me to explain how this is some kind of headcanon thing for me, I need to explain what love, in this case, means for me. So love had always been something I did for another person or people. I love my family, I love Carolina. It was always an external force which was directed externally. I recognised its power and how it created a bond between myself and other people. The quality of love might change and differ depending on the relationship, and it might change over time. But love as it applied to me, that wasn't really a thing. At least love for myself directed towards me. Until I decided to transition. And since then, I've come to appreciate how that choice to transition has fully allowed myself to become myself. It was an act of pure love for myself. When I used to feel ambivalent towards the person that I saw in the mirror, now I love that person. Not necessarily in a narcissistic way, but appreciative and caring. I love that I've done this for myself, and I love the person that I'm becoming. So this song reflects that for me. In my mind's eye, it's a song I'm singing to myself. I know that sounds strange and yes, maybe a little narcissistic, but there you go. The song for me touches on how I know that so many people probably can't understand why that I'm transitioning, let alone how it can provide so much joy and happiness for me. But maybe if you've experienced love, then you'd understand why. There are a couple of interesting lines in there about being misunderstood by the wider world. You can blame me, try to shame me, or I feel sorry for all of those who pity me. And also the idea of having to detransition potentially. I know to ever let you go is more than I can ever stand. And that really brings home this idea for myself. Now, as I said, I know this isn't the universal interpretation, but for me it's a truly meaningful ballad towards myself, and it's a song that really makes me happy. The last track is a little bit more modern, but it's still 20 years old. Actually, it looks like the album might be getting a re-release or something, as I saw the album itself kind of flagged on Spotify as being released in 2025. So perhaps they're going to redo it or something. So I really like Goldfrapp's first album, Felt Mountain, in particular the track Utopia. It had the same kind of dream-like, blissful quality that many of my favourite tracks my dad played to me had. It evoked images of landscapes in a time and place outside our own. But I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about Ride a White Horse. Upbeat poppy with a rhythm and beat you can dance to, it represents everything I didn't like about the direction Goldfrapp went into post Felt Mountain. It was joyful, albeit with dark undertones, and as someone who would love to bask in self-pity back in the day, how could I enjoy songs which were even somewhat upbeat and optimistic? Not ever someone who was into dancing at the disco, it was not a track that I initially paid any mind to. Well, over a year ago, I revisited Goldfrapp's discography, and this track stood out. I was re-evaluating my relationship with my own body at the time, and I was discovering that I enjoy the movement of it. Some yoga classes were more like therapy sessions for me, bringing me to tears as I felt part of, not apart from, my body for the first time. I was comfortable within myself. It felt like a miracle, and you might not necessarily understand that unless you've had this severe disconnect between your sense of self and your physical being, but I could feel that slowly reconnecting. And sometimes I'd find myself dancing around my flat, just appreciating the experience of my mind and body connecting like it never had before. And this track is my dance anthem. There's something so freeing, so dreamy and floaty when the chorus kicks in. It's almost impossible to not want to dance down the street when I listen to it on my way to work. And sometimes, yes, I have allowed myself that little privilege. Anyway, I think these three tracks are a decent summary of how I willfully misinterpreted songs to fit my own personal narrative. But I would argue that's fine due to death of the author. There's a ton of tracks I could talk about at great length and go into, so if you found this particular video interesting, do let me know, because I could quite happily do this again someday. And some of those tracks will not even be more than 10 years old, so, you know, maybe there'll be some new tracks in there too. Moreover, there are films that I have misinterpreted and books that I have misinterpreted, so, you know, there's a lot that I could go into here on this kind of headcanon trans theory journey that I've taken you along on this video. But I'll leave it there. I hope that you found this interesting. I really enjoyed the fact that I could talk about my past, my history, and tie that to a musical experience. I think that's very appropriate, and I think it's quite an interesting way of talking about these things. As an aside, I'm toying with the thought of starting a side channel which focuses on fashion and the like, as I think I'm pretty well put together, style-wise at least. And some of us trans girls need a little bit of advice. In fact, in some cases, a lot of advice when it comes to fashion and style. I'm not just talking about how to put clothing together, but also some specific stuff with regards to the trans experience when encountering style, perhaps for the first time. This is all perfectly understandable if people are feeling they're a little bit lost when it comes to style and fashion. And I think maybe there's a little gap in the vlogging market, because I know there's a lot of cis women that talk about fashion and style. There's a lot of trans people on YouTube in general, but I'm not sure if there's many people that are marrying these two things. So maybe in the next couple of weeks, I might put out something like this, so keep an eye out. I've got a little bit more time to be developing this, so we'll see. Some of you might know that I have had a change to my work circumstances, and so it has left me in a very difficult financial situation. I know that I have mentioned this before, but if you enjoy this content, I would really appreciate it if you could buy me a coffee. I'm not going to be able to buy myself any coffees anytime soon, so if you could buy one for me if you've liked this video, that would be amazing, and I would really appreciate it. Otherwise, and I'll put all of the information. Here's the QR code, and the link is in the description if you need to click on it there. Otherwise, I hope that you have a really nice week, a brilliant weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. All the best. Take care. Goodbye.